It's live, Bronwyn.
With me now is Andre Cilliers from TreasuryOne. Andre, good to have you with me here on Biz News TV. And we're looking at a dollar rand at the moment, which has gone above that 15 level to the US dollar. Talk to me about the risk-off scenario that seems to be hitting the local unit.
Yes, that's an interesting one, risk-off scenario. I've done some other work apart from looking at what happens in China and America and wherever. And I've gone back till 2016, and there's a very interesting pattern on unfolding since then. That from the sort of last week of September towards the around 10th to the middle of October, the rand has always weakened and always moved in a negative direction. So now wonders whether this is a timing issue or whether it has to do with any changes in the fundamentals in the market as it stands.
So let's talk about the energy crisis that is hitting the Northern Hemisphere and also concerns out of China. We have obviously seen Brent crude ticking up back to that $80 a barrel. Are you watching this unfold with caution? I mean, an electricity crisis in the Northern Hemisphere could be something that really ignites markets to the negative?
Yeah, you wonder whether Eskom is involved in the Northern Hemisphere and in China at the moment. But if you look at the Northern Hemisphere and you look at the oil price, then the oil price traditionally comes under a bit of pressure as we go into the winter season in the Northern Hemisphere. The energy crisis always unfolds around these periods because that's when the energy usage reaches high levels. And imports of oil and so forth reaches high levels as well in anticipation of a winter season that lies ahead. You know, so some of these things, we should be careful to call it a crisis or whether it's really just this time of the year. That's
so basically, Andre, you're saying that all of these elements are seasonal. One, the weakness of the rand is a seasonal impact, and two, as you're saying, the perceived energy crisis in the UK. Of course, there's a shortage of LNG. This is something that is just a seasonal norm. Would that be fair?
That would be fair. That's a seasonal norm. It happens every year, and you can go and do the graphs. You can go and do the sums. That happens every year. Obviously, there's other reasons that comes in at times like this that exaggerate the situation and creates more volatility. And currently, we do have the whole situation surrounding Evergrande. We know about that. They did make the payment at the end of the day last week, but that does not take them out of the woodworks. And it still puts China and that sector under the spotlight. We had seen that the Chinese central bank had pumped in some $55 billion last week to shore up liquidity in their markets. So yes, obviously these things does have an impact at times like this and creates more volatility and more of a risk-off situation. And that's part of it.
Obviously, we had the South African Reserve Bank meeting last week, holding interest rates at record lows, with the repo currently at 3.5% in South Africa. But commentary seems to indicate that the MPC statement was hawkish enough to allow for an interest rate hike should the South African Reserve Bank need to move quickly at any point down the line. Do you agree with that sentiment?
I would agree with that sentiment, and we've had a central bank for the last couple of years that moves swiftly and that moves proactively. And I think the word here on proactively is most probably the most important one because that's what we've seen from the central bank and that's how they act. If we look at the changes that they've made on the inflation targets and the expectations thereof, I would not be too concerned because that really a 0.1% upward change is nothing significant. what's more significant is the growth figures for the 2022 and 2023 year that was revised quite aggressively lower. That's more of a concern because that's the areas that we would actually want to see revised upwards. That's what we need in this economy, because that's ultimately what will stimulate the employment sector and the creation of jobs. Low growth does not stimulate that, and we've had a backlog. We've had still have a very high unemployment. So those are areas of concern. But that also tells us that even if they do move interest rate upwards, it would not be aggressive moves upward. It would not be drastic moves. It would be small, and that would have less of an impact than we really think is
so. Andre,
significant.
post this recent meeting, when have you modeled in the first interest rate increase out of the South African Reserve Bank? When can we expect that?
Well, I look at America, I look at the Northern Hemisphere, I look at their stance on the movement of interest rates, and I look at our inflation rate that is still very much contained at levels just slightly above the mid-target where Mr. Kanyahu wants it. And then I've penciled in only in the first quarter, towards the end of the first quarter of next year, an interest rate increase in South Africa.
So the first quarter of next year. And as you say, just a 25 basis point rate hike at that juncture?
That would only be a 25 basis point increase, not much more than that. And then on top of that, maybe a further 25 basis points in the second quarter.
Let's also just talk about the raft of economic data that's coming out this week, and that may sway your opinion when it comes to factoring the direction for the rand. We've obviously got some data coming out that'll give us direction on consumer health, on government finances. What will you be looking to most importantly this week?
Well, I think the one that I look most importantly is actually not what happens this week. The government finances is important, but what's more important to me is we're getting closer to the medium-term budget speech of our new Minister of Finance. And that would be, I want to say, his first real public appearance in Parliament, where he gives us the statistics, the rundown, and his outlook going forward into 2022 and 2023. That would give us an idea of how a budget change can be imminent coming from him early next year. And I think that's more important to me than anything else at this point in time.
But Andre, most people are factoring a very steady as she goes transition in terms of the new finance minister versus Minister Tito Mboweni, and no radical changes from a budgetary perspective. Would that be a fair assertion?
That would be a fair assumption, yes. I don't think he will make radical moves, but he would certainly want to, put his rubber stamp down on things and say, I am now in charge and this is my way forward. I can definitely not expect him to just follow in the footsteps of Tito Mboweni as it was. He will rubber stamp his own stamp on it and make sure that people know who's in charge. No doubt in my mind as to that. I think he gets a bit of a windfall in the sense that when we get to the medium-term budget speech, he could come in with some relatively good figures. That would be windfalls from the tax income side, because we had such significant increases in profits from the financial sector, from the mining sector, basically from many sectors in the country. He's had some windfall income that came in. We've also seen that the retail sales did increase quite a bit. That could give him a bit of a windfall income on the VAT side as well. So he gets a bit of a positive one, but that also gives him room to, as I said, put his stamp on it. And we can expect definitely that he will give us some indication as to what happens going into next year.
Andre, when we spoke previously, you had factored in a key risk for the rand being the local government elections and potential rioting and looting. This still must remain as a red flag when it comes to your scenario planning.
It is still a red flag to me, and the political intolerance between political parties, the mudslinging between political parties, to me is still a problem. You know, I don't think it's being fought as adults. I think it's being fought as children. Damaging placards and killing people is definitely not the way adults do it. It's definitely not a way that sophisticated people do it. I think it's ridiculous. And I think, once again, you know, when you have the masses and you speak to the masses and you start promising them all sorts of things, and I've listened yesterday about, you know, how everything by one political party is just being offered as free. And the one thing that they continuously miss is, where does the income come from this? But they seem to be taxing, increasing property taxes, increasing this, increasing that. You know, that's dangerous things to tell the masses. It creates the wrong expectations. And those wrong expectations is what ultimately leads to unrest, is what ultimately leads to looting, etc. So to me, still very much quite a big risk.
And the risk to the upside on the rand there, where would you see the rand going if we did see, and of course we are all hoping that that won't be an eventuality, but if we did see the looting and rioting coming back into play, where would that rand go?
We will shoot up to the 16 levels and most probably breach it slightly. And the comeback from there would be extremely difficult. Because the investor confidence that we will lose, if that happens again, will have a tremendous impact on the economy. It will have a tremendous impact on local consumers and how they look at the economy and how they look at spending their money, and a drastic impact on how quickly and swiftly people will start taking money out of the country. Ultimately very negative. So a comeback from those high levels, if these things do happen in a bad and aggressive way, would be very, very terrible for us.
Then just coming back to the medium-term budget that you mentioned, obviously as giving the currency some key direction, what are you bracing for there in terms of direction from the rand with the mini budget?
I think it will be positive. I'm going to remain positive. I'm going to remain positive in the sense that I think that the risk that I've just pointed out on looting in a horrible election, that has got a low scenario probability for me. And the strongest probability is that from the middle of October onwards, we will see the rand coming back and strengthening again, and we will go back down into a trading range of 1420 to 1470 and end the year in those ranges. I would not even rule out that the rand could slightly breach a 14 level right towards the end of the year.
Andre, thank you very much for weighing in on the rand and on the global environment as to how that impacts the local unit. Andre Cilliers